Why are some of the world's most beautiful places telling tourists to stay away? Well, they're not literally stopping tourists from coming in, but they're protesting and asking governments to stop all these tourists from coming in and running wild and destroying everything. Over-tourism is becoming a serious problem now, and you see it everywhere on social media. You have hordes of tourists blocking views, leaving trash everywhere, making it hard for the locals to live their day-to-day lives. We love to travel, but sometimes these countries just can't handle how many people enter. My name is Henry, and I love to talk travel. We will talk about places that are dealing with over-tourism and what they are doing to fight back. What do you think about over-tourism? Do you think it's a problem that can be prevented, or do you think it's something that we just have to deal with? Now, the first place on the list is sick and tired of expats coming in, opening Airbnbs, pushing out the locals, and they're even taking it to the streets and protesting how unhappy and angry they are. Airbnb is destroying the culture of this country. Too many apartment buildings, rooms are getting taken up by these Airbnb short-term rentals, making it harder for locals to find affordable homes. And this really frustrates the locals and makes them even more jaded towards foreigners. The first place on the list dealing with over-tourism is Spain, specifically with Airbnb and short-term rentals destroying the local culture. Now, when you want to travel to Europe, if you've never been before, Spain is usually one of the first places that comes up in your head because it's a safe option and there's still a lot of beautiful culture and sights and things to do. I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go to watch a football match, eat delicious food, and just see some beautiful beaches. But now I'm a little hesitant because Airbnbs and short-term rentals drive up housing costs, forcing locals to move out of their neighborhoods. Tourism-dependent jobs also offer low wages and low stability, while the wealth generated from the tourism only benefits a small elite few. This inequality of wealth distribution really makes it harder for locals to live in Spain and certain cities. And while that is happening, the cities are losing their cultural identity as traditional businesses are replaced by tourist-focused establishments. On top of that, overcrowding, pollution, and traffic congestion has made life much harder for the locals, with non-tourist areas often neglected. Many citizens are pushing for stronger regulations on short-term rentals and a more balanced, diversified economy to address these growing challenges. Locals are so frustrated that there have been anti-tourism protests to really show the government what's going on and make their voices heard. Spain is cracking down on Airbnb and short-term rentals. Starting December 2nd, 2024, all rental hosts must register with the government, keep guest records for 3 years, and report every booking to the authorities. If they don't follow the rules, they could get fined up to 30,000 euros. Some cities are going even further. Barcelona is banning all short-term rentals by 2028 to make housing more affordable for locals. Madrid now requires rentals to have a special license, and if an apartment building, a separate entrance from permanent residents. And Seville is even shutting off water and electricity for illegal rentals. And it's not even just hosts getting in trouble. The Spanish government is also investigating Airbnb for not removing illegal listings. If found guilty, they could be fined up to 100,000 euros. These new rules are to protect local housing and make sure tourism doesn't overtake Spanish cities. What do you think? Do you think Spain is going too far, or do you think they have the right to protect their culture? I think it's a good thing. They're trying to regulate how many Airbnb listings there are and put their residents first. It can get very out of hand with Airbnb, and it's very common having tourists push out the locals because of a high cost of living in certain areas. So I think it's a good thing they're doing this. Spain isn't the only country dealing with over-tourism. In some parts of the world, things have gotten so bad that tourists are being banned from taking photos of famous landmarks. The next destination has become a very, very, very popular tourist destination over the last 2 years for certain reasons. And it's everywhere now on social media with how overrun and how many tourists there are in specific locations. Of course, it's always been one of the most visited countries in the world, but now that it's even more affordable to visit, tourists are flocking in herds to see this country. The place I'm talking about is Japan. In a previous video, I talked about over-tourism in Kyoto, Japan. I think you should check out that video if you're curious about what's happening in Kyoto and what the local government is doing to prevent all this over-tourism. But there's also another part of Japan that's really dealing with over-tourism and being affected by it. Japan is a beautiful and diverse country. There's so much to see. You you have the cities, you have small towns, and you have a lot of natural landmarks to see. One of those natural landmarks is Mount Fuji. You might have seen on social media photos of Mount Fuji with a Lawson in front of it. That Lawson, I'm sorry if I butchered this, but it's in the town of Fujikawa Ujiko, and things have gotten so bad there that local law enforcement put up a big black screen to block the view of Mount Fuji from behind that Lawson because too many tourists were causing problem in the town. People crowded a popular spot in front of a convenience store, standing in the road and leaving trash. Local businesses like a nearby dental clinic complained about tourists trespassing, smoking, and even being rude when asked to move. Since most visitors just take photos and don't stay overnight, the town wasn't making money from tourism, but was dealing with a lot of issues. Recently, the barriers have been taken down, but law enforcement is happy to put it back up if things get very bad again. And it's unfortunate this had to happen. I noticed when traveling, there are lots of groups and tour groups and people that they love to see these sites, but they never really take into account the town they're in or the locals. They never think about them. They go there, take the photos, leave their trash, or not considerate of the town, and they just go home, leaving the locals to deal with the problem. Another problem is Mount Fuji itself. Too many visitors have caused congestion, pollution, and unsafe climbing conditions. To fix this, new rules were introduced in 2024. Now only 4,000 people can climb each day, and visitors must pay a 2,000 yen fee to help maintain the trails and restrooms. A reservation system has also been put in place to manage the number of climbers to prevent dangerous bullet climbing, which is rushing up overnight without rest. Entrance gates will be closed from 4 p.m. to 3 p.m. unless visitors have a reservation at a mountain hut. And on top of that, different rules apply to different sides. On the Yamanashi side, climbers must register and pay the entrance fee before going up. The Shizuoka side, pre-registration, where climbers must provide their schedule, watch a safety video, and get a wristband before climbing. And while this side doesn't have a fee, it does ask for a optional 1,000 yen donation. So do you agree with the way Japan is handling this over-tourism issue? I personally think it's good to have regulations for safety, especially on Mount Fuji. When it comes to taking photos and tourists disrupting the daily life of locals, I think it's a good thing, because can you imagine having hordes of tourists blocking your way when you're just trying to go to work and then leaving your town even dirtier than before? So I think it's a good idea they're putting in these regulations. But what do you think? Now, the next place on the list is somewhere you might not expect to be dealing with over tourism, but there is a part of this country that is struggling with it, and the government is taking steps to deal with it. Bukchon Hanok Village, I'm sorry if I butchered it, is a historic neighborhood famous for its old-fashioned Hanok houses from the Joseon dynasty. It sits between two of Seoul's most famous palaces. With its narrow streets, curved roof tiles, and wooden homes, the village feels like a step back in time, showing what Korea looked like long ago. South Korea is taking action to control too many tourists in this village. Too many visitors have been making life difficult for the people who live there by being noisy, leaving trash, and invading their privacy. To fix this, the government is planning a curfew from 5 p.m. to 10 a.m. starting in March 2025. And will fine tourists $70 if they don't follow the rules. Some business owners do worry this will deter tourists from visiting and make them feel unwelcome, but others believe they are needed to protect the village. These new rules mean travelers need to plan ahead and be more careful when they visit. They need to respect local customs. While some find it inconvenient, I think it's necessary, because protecting local customs and being respectful to locals, especially in big crowds, is very important. If you have big crowds of tourists coming in and not being respectful, then it's going to be very harsh for the locals. On top of that, government and travel companies might offer more smaller and controlled tours and even promote tourism in other parts of Korea to prevent this village from being overrun with tourists. Now, the next destination is arguably the most popular nomad and tourist destination in Europe. You have many people moving here from abroad to live or work online from. The next place on the list is Portugal. It is a very popular place for tourists, but too many visitors are causing problems, especially in cities like Lisbon and Porto. The streets are crowded, expensive because of short-term rentals, so just like in Spain, and public spaces are packed. To fix this, the government has stopped allowing new Airbnb rentals in certain areas and raised taxes for tourists. Outside the cities, places like the Algarve coast and Madeira also have too many visitors, which harms nature and makes traffic a lot worse. And on top of that, many locals feel like tourism is changing their communities, making daily life much harder. And while Portugal does enjoy the money that tourism brings in, they are trying to find a way to welcome visitors without hurting the locals. A big problem I see online and people talk about is many locals in Lisbon are struggling with too many rentals in their neighborhoods. They used to have friends and neighbors they can talk to, but nowadays a lot of the apartments around them are tourists, foreigners. They can't find consistency and community with neighbors that will be there forever. Some even find themselves as the only long-term resident in a building. And this makes life for locals much harder. There was a woman whose husband collapsed and she couldn't contact any of her neighbors for help because they didn't speak the language. And another resident even mentioned it feels like a ghost town, even though the city is full of people. With so many homes being turned into short-term rentals, prices have shot up, making it much harder for locals to live in these places. A lot of them are forced to leave. It's really unfortunate the locals feel like they have no community because too many of their neighbors are coming and going. They're being forced out because of rentals making prices go up. Now, what do you think about this? Do you think Airbnb rentals are a big problem and need to be regulated even more, just like in Spain? There are many places I want to go and see, but it seems like it's very hard nowadays with how many people are traveling and how much large groups of tourists are affecting local communities and making it much harder for locals to live and leaving a mess after they go. I'd love to hear what your opinions are down below. I also have another video about overtourism, talking about some other destinations I didn't cover in this video. I think it's really good to know because there are many places around the world dealing with overtourism. So whenever you're traveling, at least be respectful of local communities. Now, I don't think we should put the locals on a pedestal because everyone at the end of the day is a human. We all have our faults. But as long as you're just respectful at home and when you travel, it should be okay.